Euratom Treaty is an international treaty which controls and governs the movement of civil nuclear material in Europe. From a legal perspective, it was not necessary for the UK to trigger an exit from Euratom when Article 50 to leave the European Union was triggered in March of this year.
The question about whether the UK could actually withdraw its decision to leave Euratom has some interesting political perspectives. Within the kind of broader debate of the Brexit question, it's something of a political sideshow. And in some ways that makes it easier for the UK to decide to withdraw. But on the other hand, in some respects, it actually makes it more difficult. When people think about the Euratom issue, they think about it through the perspective of the question of Brexit. The UK's decision to leave Euratom was transacted through the same Article 50 withdrawal notice that included their decision to leave the EU in general. If the UK then decides to amend or rescind that in order to stay in Euratom, it suggests that the UK could do the same for the EU in general, and that's likely to be politically quite unpalatable for the UK government. So, based on that, the debate is now likely to move to how do we mitigate some of the risks of leaving, and what do we think about the question of having a transitional period before the UK eventually comes out. So I think there's probably scope for a different political approach to Euratom than there was for Brexit. Euratom wasn't actually on the ballot paper when the referendum happened. I think few people, when they were voting to leave, thought that they were thinking about Euratom.
An unorderly exit of the UK from Euratom without a very clear regime in place for what will happen after Euratom to this area will make the import and export of nuclear material in and from the UK very difficult. It is vital that a clear and firm, legally binding transition regime is in place between the 29th of March 2019 and the post-Euratom final arrangement between the UK and Euratom in order not to trigger all these scenarios that I've evoked earlier. Also, government will need to put in place a safeguarding regime for the nuclear industry in the UK in order to replicate the Euratom regime from which the UK is exiting.
One of the big things that needs to happen now is the UK needs to decide what its future relationship with Euratom is going to be. There are broadly two options here. One is that the UK seeks some kind of associate membership, and that likely to have to be slightly creative about that, because the sorts of deep interaction across a broad range of issues that the UK is likely to want doesn't currently exist. The other option is that the UK leaves and becomes a third country. That means it has to seek something called a nuclear cooperation agreement with Euratom that can replace the current relationship. Now beyond that, the UK is also going to have to think about its relationship with third countries. And that includes, as a priority, the important suppliers of nuclear fuel, nuclear goods, and some of the countries with which the UK has research and development interactions. And there, we're talking about nuclear cooperation agreements again, with kind of key countries such as Australia, Japan, the US, South Korea.
I do believe that there is a legal case for a different transition period for the EU than for Euratom. Euratom is its own treaty, as I explained earlier. It's a completely different regime. The exit provisions are decoupled legally from the Article 50 trigger. There are numerous practical issues that will need to be sorted out and are absolutely vital to the UK nuclear industry. So there are good arguments both from a legal perspective as well as from a practical perspective to argue for a longer transition period in relation to Euratom.
And if we take a kind of different approach to, for example, the transitional period, we're unlikely to see people on the streets if we decide to take a bit longer. So what will that require? Well, I think that probably requires two things, politically speaking. One is to make sure that in the debate, the issue of Euratom and lengthening that transition period is separated from the broader question of Brexit. And two, making sure that government knows that actually that longer transitional period is required. And that's going to mean that people like industry, their employees, unions, research departments make their voices heard about what it is they actually need.